The winter of 1879 had arrived early in the Colorado Rockies, bringing with it a bone-chilling wind that cut through the towering pines like 1,000 invisible knives. Snow had been falling steadily for 3 days, blanketing the rugged landscape in a deceptive shroud of pristine white. The only sounds that broke the mountain silence were the occasional crack of frozen branches and the distant rhythmic echo of axes biting into wood, the solitary music of lumberjacks earning their keep in this unforgiving wilderness. In a ramshackle cabin nestled at the base of Cedar Ridge, Eliza Hawthorne pressed her palm against her swollen belly, feeling the life within stir restlessly. At 19, she should have been planning her future with hope and anticipation. Instead, she found herself listening to her father's gruff voice, haggling over her worth like she was no more than a head of cattle. "She's young and strong," Samuel Hawthorne was saying to the stranger who'd arrived that morning. The man wore a black coat that had seen better days and boots caked with mud. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept over Eliza as she stood in the corner of their one-room dwelling. "Can cook, clean and mend. The babe will come in spring. Another pair of hands for work eventually." The stranger, who'd introduced himself only as McKenna, scratched his scraggly beard. "A pregnant girl's more burden than blessing. Folk don't take kindly to unwed mothers. Makes her harder to place." The word made Eliza's stomach turn. They spoke of her as if she were goods to be traded, not a person with a heart that was breaking with each passing moment. $20, her father counted, desperation creeping into his voice. "We got 3 other youngins to feed and this winter's been harsh. $20 sees us through till spring." Her mother, Martha, sat silently by the fireplace, her weathered hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the dying embers. She hadn't spoken a word since McKenna's arrival, but Eliza could see the shame etched in every line of her face. 15, McKenna said flatly. "And that's generous for damaged goods." Damaged goods. The word struck Eliza like a physical blow. Yes, she'd made a mistake trusting Thomas Brennan, the merchant's son, who'd whispered sweet promises before disappearing east when she told him about the baby. But did one mistake mean she deserved this? "Pitch, please." Eliza finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Don't do this. I'll work harder. I'll take in washing, mending, anything." Samuel Hawthorne didn't even look at her. 15 then, he said to McKenna, extending his callous hand. "But you take her tonight. Can't have her putting notions in the other children's heads." The transaction was completed with a handshake that sealed Eliza's fate. McKenna counted out the coins slowly, each clink against the wooden table another nail in the coffin of her former life. Her younger siblings, Mary, age 12, John, 10, and little Ruth, only 6, peered out from behind the curtain that separated the sleeping area, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Get your things," McKenna ordered, his voice devoid of any warmth. "We leave within the hour." Eliza moved mechanically to gather her few possessions. A spare dress worn thin from years of use. Her mother's Bible, its pages yellowed and fragile, a small sewing kit, and a faded photograph of her grandmother, the only member of her family who'd ever shown her genuine kindness. Everything fit into a small cloth bundle. As she prepared to leave, her mother finally rose and approached her. Martha's hands trembled as she pressed a small object into Eliza's palm, a simple wooden cross on a leather cord. "God forgive us," her mother whispered, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "God forgive us all." But Eliza couldn't find it in her heart to offer forgiveness. Not now, maybe not ever. McKenna bound her wrists with rough rope, ignoring her protest that she wouldn't run. "Can't take chances," he muttered. "Lost 2 girls last month to foolishness that won't happen again." The reality of her situation crashed over Eliza like an avalanche. She was being sold. Sold by her own family to a man who spoke casually of lost girls as if they were merely misplaced possessions. As McKenna led her out into the bitter night, Eliza caught a final glimpse of her family through the frost-covered window. Her father counted his coins by candlelight while her siblings watched her departure with haunted eyes. Only Ruth, too young to understand, waved goodbye. The wind howled through the pines as they made their way down the treacherous mountain path. McKenna had tethered her to his horse, forcing her to walk alongside while he rode. Behind them, another man emerged from the shadows. McKenna's partner, a brute named Josiah, with scarred hands and breath that reek of whiskey. "This the new one?" Josiah asked, eyeing Eliza with interest that made her skin crawl. "I bound for Mrs. Garrison's establishment in Denver. She pays well for young ones even with child." Eliza's blood ran cold. She'd heard whispers of such places, houses where women were forced to entertain men for money. The baby kicked hard as if sensing her distress. They traveled for hours through the deepening snow, the mountains looming like dark sentinels against the star-filled sky. Eliza's feet grew numb in her thin boots, and the rope chafed her wrists raw, but physical discomfort palled compared to the terror growing in her heart. It was near midnight when they stopped to rest at an abandoned mining shack. While the men built a fire and passed a flask between them, Eliza's mind raced. She had to escape. Whatever fate awaited her in Denver would be worse than death for her and her unborn child. The men grew careless as the whiskey took hold, their vigilance waning. Josiah dozed by the fire while McKenna stepped outside to relieve himself. This was her chance with trembling fingers. Eliza worked at the knots binding her wrists, using her teeth when her numb hands proved useless. The rope finally loosened just as McKenna's footsteps crunched in the snow outside. Without thinking, she grabbed a burning branch from the fire and swung it at Josiah as he startled awake. He howled in pain, clutching his face. Eliza burst through the door and ran blindly into the forest. McKenna's shouts echoing behind her. Tree branches tore at her dress and hair as she stumbled through the darkness, guided only by moonlight filtering through the canopy. Behind her, she could hear the men crashing through the underbrush, their curses growing closer. A gunshot split the night air, the bullet splintering bark mere inches from her head. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed on, her breath coming in ragged gasps that formed clouds in the freezing air. The baby seemed to sense her desperation, remaining still as if understanding the need for her to move swiftly. The chase continued for what felt like hours, though it might have been minutes. Time lost meaning in the darkness and terror. Eliza's strength was failing, her legs trembling with exhaustion. When she stumbled upon a narrow ravine, without hesitation, she slid down its steep sides, rocks tearing at her palms and dress. At the bottom, she found a shallow cave hidden behind a curtain of icicles. She crawled inside, pressing herself against the cold stone, trying to quiet her labored breathing. The men's voices echoed above, frustrated and angry. She couldn't have gone far, McKenna snarled. Not in her condition. Let the wolves have her, Josiah spat. Their voices gradually faded as they moved away, but Eliza remained hidden, shivering in the darkness. Hours passed. The cold seeped into her bones and she knew she couldn't stay here. She had to move. Had to find shelter, or both she and her child would perish. As the first pale light of dawn filtered through the trees, Eliza emerged from her hiding place. Her dress was torn, her hands bloody, and her body ached with cold and exhaustion. But she was free for now. She stumbled through the forest, no longer sure of direction, driven only by the primal need to survive. The landscape was alien in the early morning light. Every shadow a potential threat. In the distance, she could hear the sound of an axe striking wood, steady, rhythmic, purposeful, where there was logging. There might be help or there might be more danger. But with her strength failing and the cold threatening to claim her, Eliza had no choice but to move toward the sound. Her vision blurred as she pushed through a final stand of pines, and then her legs gave out entirely. She collapsed at the base of an enormous pine tree, its trunk scarred from years of harsh weather. The world spun around her as darkness crept in from the edges of her vision. The last thing she heard before unconsciousness claimed her was the axe falling silent, followed by the crunch of heavy footsteps approaching through the snow. Whether salvation or doom approached, Eliza no longer had the strength to care. She pressed one hand protectively over her belly and surrendered to the darkness, whispering a prayer that somehow someway her child might still have a chance at life. The footsteps stopped just inches away, and a shadow fell across her still form as the mountain morning held its breath, waiting to see what fate had in store for the runaway girl who'd been sold by her kin. Jonah Blackwood set his axe against the pine trunk and wiped the sweat from his brow despite the morning cold. At 32, he'd grown accustomed to the solitary rhythm of his work, the bite of steel into wood, the satisfying crack of timber, the honest ache in his muscles at day's end. The forest was his sanctuary, far from the poisonous whispers and judgmental stares of townsfolk who'd branded him a pariah years ago. He was about to resume his work when something caught his eye. A splash of faded blue against the pristine white snow. His hand instinctively moved to the rifle propped against a nearby tree. Years of mountain living having taught him caution. But as he approached, he realized it wasn't a threat, but a crumpled figure lying motionless at the base of an ancient pine. A woman, young by the look of her, though her face was pale as death itself. Her dress was torn in multiple places, revealing bloody scratches beneath. What struck him most forcefully was the obvious swell of her belly. She was with child, and far along by the look of it, Jonah knelt beside her, his large, calloused hand hovering uncertainly over her face before checking for breath. There, faint but present, small puffs of vapor in the frigid air. Her wrists bore angry red marks from rope burns, and her hands were scraped raw. Whatever had brought her to this state, it hadn't been by choice. "Miss," he called softly, then louder. "Miss, can you hear me?" No response. Her lips had taken on a bluish tinge, and frost had begun forming on her eyelashes. If he didn't act quickly, both she and the child she carried would be lost to the mountain's merciless cold. Decision made. Jonah carefully lifted her into his arms. Despite her condition, she weighed hardly anything, too thin for a woman carrying a child. As he adjusted his hold, she stirred slightly, a small moan escaping her lips. "Easy now," he murmured, though she remained unconscious. "I've got you." The trek back to his cabin took longer than usual. Jonah picking his way carefully through the snow-covered terrain to avoid jostling his unexpected burden. His home sat in a clearing a quarter-mile from where he'd been working. A sturdy structure he'd built with his own hands 7 years prior, smoke still curled from the chimney. He'd banked the fire before heading out at dawn, shouldering open the heavy wooden door. Jonah carried the woman inside and laid her gently on his bed, the only bed in the one-room cabin. He quickly stoked the fire, adding several logs until the flames roared to life, casting dancing shadows on the walls adorned with tools, dried herbs, and a single jur type he couldn't bear to put away. Turning back to the woman, Jonah faced a dilemma. Her wet clothing needed to come off, but propriety. He pushed the thought aside. Propriety meant nothing if she died from cold. Moving with clinical efficiency, he removed her outer garments, careful not to look more than necessary, and wrapped her in thick wool blankets. Her skin was ice cold to the touch. He heated water on the stove and prepared warm compresses for her hands and feet, working to restore circulation gradually. As he tended to her injuries, cleaning the cuts, wrapping her wounded wrists, he couldn't help but notice details. Quality fabric in her dress despite its current state. Delicate hands that had known work but weren't destroyed by it. A wooden cross on a leather cord around her neck. Hours passed. Jonah maintained his vigil, keeping the fire high and regularly checking her breathing. He made a thin broth from dried venison and vegetables, hoping she'd wake enough to take some nourishment. The day wore on, shadows lengthening across the cabin floor, and still she remained locked in her dangerous slumber. It was near dusk when she finally stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, green as summer leaves, and immediately filled with terror. She tried to sit up, gasping, her hands clutching the blankets to her chest. "No," she cried out. Voice hoarse. "Please, I won't." "Easy," Jonah said, holding up his hands and stepping back to give her space. "You're safe. No one's going to hurt you." Her wild gaze darted around the cabin, taking in her surroundings before landing on him. He watched her assess him, his size, which he knew could be intimidating. His rough clothing, the unkempt beard he hadn't bothered to trim in weeks. Her fear didn't diminish. "Where am I? Who are you?" Each word seemed to cost her effort. "Name's Jonah Blackwood. You're in my cabin about 2 miles north of Cedar Ridge. Found you half frozen in the snow this morning." He kept his voice low, steady, the same tone he used with spooked horses. "What's your name, miss?" She hesitated, clearly debating whether to trust him with even that much. Finally, "Eliza. Eliza Hawthorne." "Well, Miss Hawthorne, you gave me quite a scare. Thought you might not wake up." He gestured to the pot on the stove, made some broth. "You need to eat something. Get your strength back." "I can't stay," she said urgently, trying again to rise. "They'll be looking for me." "If they find me here, who's looking for you?" Her mouth clamped shut. But he'd already seen enough. The rope marks, the terror in her eyes, the way she'd said they like the word itself was poison. "Listen," Jonah said carefully. "I don't know what trouble you're running from, but this cabin's near impossible to find unless you know where to look. Been living here 7 years and I can count on one hand the folks who found it. You're safe for now." "You don't understand," Eliza whispered, one hand moving protectively to her belly. "The men who are after me, they're dangerous. They were taking me to." She couldn't finish, but the horror in her eyes said enough. Jonah's jaw tightened. He'd heard stories of such men, traitors in human misery who operated in the shadows of civilization. "How many?" "McKenna and Josiah." The names came out like curses. "I escaped in the night, but they have horses. Dogs. Maybe they'll have a hard time tracking through last night's snowfall." Jonah interrupted. "Storm came through after midnight. Would have covered any trail. Besides, these mountains are full of ravines and false paths. Even experienced trackers get turned around." He moved to the stove, ladling broth into a bowl. Right now, you need to focus on getting stronger. Can't help yourself or your little one if you're weak from cold and hunger. Eliza watched him wearily as he brought the bowl over, setting it on the small table beside the bed. The aroma of the broth made her stomach clench with hunger. But still she hesitated. It's not poisoned. If that's what you're thinking, Jonah said dryly. If I meant you harm, would have been easier to leave you in the snow. Logic won over fear. Eliza reached for the bowl with shaking hands, and Jonah had to study it for her as she took the first sip. Thank you, she whispered while she ate. Jonah busied himself around the cabin, giving her space while keeping one eye on her. She was a puzzle, clearly gentry or close to it, but with rope marks on her wrists and running alone through the mountains in winter while heavy with child. The story there was likely dark, and he found himself hoping she'd trust him enough to share it. This is good, Eliza said softly, having finished half the bowl. I haven't. It's been days since. There's more when you're ready, Jonah assured her. He pulled up a rough Hune chair, maintaining a respectful distance. Miss Hawthorne, Eliza, she corrected. Please, I think we're past formalities. Considering. She gestured vaguely at her state of undress beneath the blankets. A faint smile tugged at Jonah's mouth, the first in longer than he could remember. Fair enough, Eliza. Then I need to ask, is there someone I should send word to? Family who might be worried. Her face crumbled. My family? They're the ones who. She took a shuddering breath. My father sold me to those men because her hand moved to her belly again. Because I brought shame on them. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with betrayal and pain. Jonah felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. He'd thought himself beyond surprise at human cruelty. But this, selling one's own daughter like livestock, still had the power to sicken him. I'm sorry, he said quietly. No one deserves that. I made a mistake. Eliza continued, tears flowing freely now. Trusted the wrong man. He promised marriage, said pretty words, then disappeared when I told him about the baby. Father said I was ruined, a burden. That $20, $15 they settled on, $15 was more than I was worth anyway. Jonah reached for a clean cloth and handed it to her. As she wiped her eyes, he noticed her looking at the jure type on the wall, the only decoration in his Spartan home. A beautiful woman with kind eyes and dark hair smiled out from the frame. Your wife? Eliza asked tentatively. Was. The word came out rougher than intended. Margaret, she passed 4 years ago. I'm sorry, he shrugged, the old pain familiar as a worn coat. She was too good for this world anyway, too gentle. The town. He stopped, shaking his head. Old wounds. No need to burden you with them. But Eliza was looking at him with those green eyes, seeing perhaps a fellow soul who'd been marked by loss. What happened? Jonah found himself answering. Though he'd spoken of it to no one in years, I was away logging camp up north, sending money home. Margaret was alone when the mayor's son took a fancy to her. She refused him, his hands clenched into fists. So he and his friends decided to teach her a lesson about spurning her betters. By the time I got home, he didn't need to finish. Eliza's face had gone pale with understanding. The law? She asked softly. The law said there was no proof that a woman like Margaret, poor, married to a laborer, might have invited the attention. That maybe I should keep a closer eye on my wife instead of leaving her alone. The bitterness in his voice could have curdled milk. So I took justice into my own hands. The mayor's son will never hurt another woman, but it made me a pariah. Came up here to escape the whispers, the stones thrown at my back. You're not a pariah, Eliza said firmly. You're a good man who did what needed doing. They sat in companionable silence for a moment. Two people bound by the understanding that sometimes the world broke you in ways that couldn't be fixed, only endured. Finally, Jonah cleared his throat. You should rest more. Your dress is drying by the fire. I'll mend the tears tomorrow. There's a trunk in the corner with some of Margaret's things. You're of a size. They should fit until we can do better. I can't take she would have wanted them used. Jonah interrupted. Margaret never could stand waste, and she had a soft spot for folks in trouble. Eliza's eyes filled with fresh tears. Why are you being so kind to me? You don't know me. I could bring danger to your door. Jonah stood, his large frame casting shadows in the firelight. Maybe because I know what it's like to have nowhere to turn. Maybe because I'm tired of seeing the strong prey on the weak while good folks do nothing. Or maybe. He paused at the door, about to step out to give her privacy. Maybe because that little one you're carrying deserves a chance at life. And damned if I'll be another person who fails you both. He left her then, stepping out into the cold night to check the perimeter of his property and gather more firewood. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the forest was quiet, save for the distant howl of wolves. As he walked, Jonah found himself thinking of Margaret, of her gentle spirit and unwavering faith in human goodness, despite all evidence to the contrary. "Well, Maggie," he murmured to the stars. "Looks like you sent me someone to save. Just hope I'm up to the task." Back in the cabin, unbeknownst to him, Eliza lay in the warm bed, clutching her grandmother's cross and whispering her own prayers of gratitude for the gruff lumberjack who'd given her shelter, and of hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd found a safe harbor in the storm that had become her life. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm that surprised them both. Elijah had expected Jonah to demand explanations, perhaps even payment for his kindness, but he asked for nothing. Each morning he rose before dawn, tended the fire, and left fresh bread and coffee before heading out to his work. Each evening he returned with firewood, game from his traps, or winter vegetables from his root cellar, maintaining a respectful distance that made her feel safe rather than isolated. On the fourth day, as snow fell softly outside the frost-etched windows, Eliza felt strong enough to move about the cabin. She found Jonah's mending pile, socks with holes, shirts missing buttons, trousers with torn seams, and set to work, needing to contribute something to this unexpected sanctuary. When Jonah returned that evening to find his worn clothing carefully repaired, he stood in the doorway, snowflakes melting in his dark hair, looking puzzled. "You didn't have to do that," he said gruffly. "I needed to," Eliza replied, not looking up from where she was preparing a simple supper with the supplies he'd brought. "I can't just take your charity. I may be carrying a child, but my hands still work fine." Something shifted in his expression. Respect, perhaps. Margaret used to say the same thing. Never could sit idle. As they shared the evening meal, venison stew with wild onions and potatoes, the silence between them had grown comfortable. The fire crackled. Wind whistled through the pines outside. And for the first time since discovering her pregnancy, Eliza felt a moment of peace. "May I ask you something?" she ventured, watching him over her coffee cup. Jonah nodded, wary but willing. "Why do you stay up here alone? You're still young, strong. You could start fresh somewhere else where nobody knows your past." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Then running doesn't change what happened. Doesn't bring Margaret back. And someone needs to tend her grave." He gestured vaguely toward the forest. "She's buried on the hillside where the wildflowers bloom in spring. Can't leave her alone." Eliza's heart ached for this man who had built his life around grief and guilt. "She wouldn't want you to be alone forever." "Maybe not," Jonah conceded. "But wanting and deserving are different things. I failed to protect her. That's not something a man comes back from. You weren't even there." "Exactly." The word came out sharp. Final, then softer. "I chose money over being with her. Chose sending wages home over standing by her side. Every choice has a consequence. Eliza, mine cost me everything." She wanted to argue, to tell him that survivor's guilt would eat him alive, but she recognized the futility. Some wounds ran too deep for words to heal. Instead, she changed the subject. "Those men, McKenna and Josiah, they'll keep looking for me. I heard them talking about a woman in Denver, Mrs. Garrison. She pays well for girls in my condition." The words tasted bitter. "They won't give up easily." Jonah's jaw tightened. "Let them come. This mountain swallowed up harder men than them. I don't want to bring violence to your door. You've been nothing but kind." "Stop." He held up a hand. "You think I've survived 7 years up here by being soft? I know these woods like the back of my hand. Every trail, every hiding spot, every place a man might set an ambush. If they come, they'll regret it." The fierce protectiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, she felt safer than she had in months. Here was a man who understood that sometimes the world forced terrible choices on good people. That night, as had become their custom, Jonah bedded down near the fire while Eliza took the bed, but sleep eluded her. The baby was active, rolling and kicking, reminding her that time was growing short. In a few months she'd have a child to care for. What then? She couldn't impose on Jonah's hospitality forever. But where could an unwed mother go? "Can't sleep?" Jonah's voice came quiet from the darkness. "The baby's restless tonight," she admitted. "I think it knows I'm worried." She heard him shift, perhaps sitting up. "What will you do after?" I don't know." The admission came out small, scared. "I have no family now. No money, no prospects. Maybe I could find work as a seamstress, or who would hire a fallen woman with a bastard child." The harsh word made her flinch. But it was what the world would call her baby. "That child's no bastard," Jonah said firmly. "That's an innocent who didn't ask to be born into complicated circumstances. And you're no fallen woman. You're someone who trusted and was betrayed. There's no shame in that. Tears slipped down her cheeks in the darkness. The world won't see it that way. Then the world's wrong. The simple conviction in his statement undid her. She began to cry in earnest for her lost innocence, for the family that had cast her out, for the uncertain future that stretched before her. The bed creaked, and then Jonah was there, sitting carefully on the edge, his hand hovering uncertainly before settling gently on her shoulder. "I'm sorry," she gasped between sobs. "I'm not usually so weak." "You're not weak," he said softly. "You're one of the strongest people I've met. You escaped those men, survived a night in the mountains while carrying a child. You've endured betrayal that would break most folks. Crying doesn't make you weak, Eliza. Makes you human." She turned toward him instinctively, and he gathered her carefully into his arms. He smelled of pine sap and wood smoke, and his embrace was gentle despite his strength. For the first time since Thomas Brennan had abandoned her, she felt truly held, truly safe. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder. He held her until her tears subsided, then eased her back onto the pillows. "Try to rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out a plan. You're not alone in this anymore." As he returned to his makeshift bed by the fire, Eliza touched the place where his hand had rested on her shoulder. Something was growing between them. Fragile as spring's first shoots, but undeniable. Not romance. It was too soon, too complicated for that, but connection, understanding, the recognition of one wounded soul by another. The next morning brought fresh snowfall and with it a new worry. Their food supplies, adequate for one person living simply, were depleting faster with 2 mouths to feed. "I need to go to town," Jonah announced over breakfast. "Stock up on supplies before the next big storm hits." Eliza's stomach clenched. "What if someone asks about me?" "They won't. I keep to myself. Don't engage in gossip. In and out quick as I can." He paused, studying her. "But it might be wise to prepare for the possibility of trouble." "Can you shoot?" "My grandmother taught me. Said a woman alone should know how to protect herself." "Smart woman." Jonah retrieved a rifle from the wall, checked it over, and showed her where he kept the ammunition. "Anyone comes while I'm gone. You bar the door and don't open it for anyone but me. If they try to force their way in, I'll do what needs doing." Eliza finished quietly. He looked at her with something like approval. "I'll be back before nightfall. There's bread in the cupboard, dried meat in the tin, water in the barrel. Stay inside, keep the fire going, and don't worry, nobody knows about this place." But after he left, Eliza couldn't shake her unease. She tried to busy herself with mending and cleaning, but every sound made her jump. Snow sliding off the roof became footsteps. Wind in the trees became whispered threats. The rifle lay across her lap as she worked. A cold comfort. The hours crawled by. Noon came and went. The baby seemed to sense her anxiety. Moving restlessly, she tried to eat but could barely swallow past the knot in her throat. Where was Jonah? Town wasn't that far. What if he'd encountered McKenna and Josiah? What if they'd hurt him because of her? By mid-afternoon she was pacing the small cabin like a caged animal. The fire burned low, but she was afraid to go outside for wood. Every worst-case scenario played through her mind. She'd brought danger to the one person who'd shown her kindness. If something happened to Jonah because of her, then footsteps crunching in snow. Her heart hammered as she raised the rifle, aimed it at the door. The footsteps stopped. "Eliza, it's me. It's Jonah." Relief flooded through her so intensely, her knees nearly buckled. She lowered the rifle and fumbled with the bar across the door. Jonah stood there, snow-dusted and carrying heavy packs, but whole and safe. "What took so long?" The words came out sharper than intended. Fear masquerading as anger. His expression softened as he took in her state. The rifle. Her pale face. The way her hands shook. "I'm sorry. The pass was worse than expected. Had to take the long way around." He stepped inside, setting down his burdens. "But I brought good news along with supplies." "News?" "Overheard talk at the general store. 2 men came through yesterday, asking about a runaway girl. Seems they got run out of town by Sheriff Watson. He doesn't tolerate their kind, and several of the church women backed him up. They've headed south toward easier pickings." Eliza sank into a chair, weak with relief. "They're gone for now, but we should stay vigilant. Men like that have long memories and longer grudges." He began unpacking the supplies. Flour, salt, coffee, dried beans, preserved vegetables, even a small bag of precious sugar. "I also brought these." He produced a bundle of fabric, warm wool for a dress, soft flannel for baby clothes. Eliza touched the material with trembling fingers. "Jonah, I can't. This must have cost." "Consider it an early Christmas gift," he said gruffly. "Can't have you wearing Margaret's things forever. and that little one will need proper clothes come spring. She looked up at him, this rough man who'd shown her more kindness in a week than she'd known in months, and felt something crack open inside her chest. Why are you doing this? Really? He was quiet for a moment, unpacking the last of the supplies. Then, maybe because I've spent 4 years punishing myself for failing Margaret. Maybe taking care of you, making sure you and that baby are safe. Maybe it's my way of making amends. I'm not your penance, Jonah Blackwood, Eliza said softly. No, he agreed, meeting her eyes. You're not. He struggled for words. This man more comfortable with actions than explanations. You're proof that maybe I'm not as dead inside as I thought. That maybe there's still something good I can do in this world. The space between them hummed with unspoken possibilities. Then the moment passed and they returned to the comfortable routine of preparing supper together. But something had shifted, deepened as they worked side by side in the warm kitchen. Snow beginning to fall again outside. Eliza realized she no longer thought of this as Jonah's cabin where she was temporarily sheltering. Somewhere between her arrival and now, it had begun to feel like home. That night, as the blizzard howled outside and the fire burned bright within, they sat together at the small table, planning for the winter ahead. The baby kicked, and without thinking, Eliza grabbed Jonah's hand and placed it on her belly. He froze, eyes wide as he felt the movement beneath his palm. Strong little one, he murmured. Wonder in his voice like its mother, Eliza said, then blushed at her boldness. But Jonah just smiled, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. I like its mother. And in that moment, with a storm raging outside and new life stirring between them, two broken people began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could build something whole together. The peace was shattered 3 days later. Jonah had gone to check his trap lines, leaving early as was his custom. Eliza was kneading bread dough, flour dusting her hands and the small wooden table. When she heard it, the distinctive sound of horses approaching through the snow. Her blood turned to ice, moving quickly but quietly. She barred the door and retrieved the rifle from its place on the wall. Through a crack in the shuttered window, she could see them, McKenna and Josiah, their horses steaming in the cold morning air. But they weren't alone. 2 more men accompanied them. Rough looking swords with the bearing of hired guns. Smoke from the chimney. McKenna was saying, someone's home. Could be anyone. One of the new men argued. These mountains are full of hermits and trappers. Maybe. McKenna allowed. But that sheriff in town was too quick to run us off. Someone tipped him, and a pregnant girl don't just vanish into thin air. They dismounted, hands resting on their weapons. Eliza's heart hammered so hard she feared they might hear it. The baby, as if sensing danger, had gone completely still. A loud knock rattled the door. Hello in there. We're travelers lost in the storm, looking for shelter and directions. Eliza remained silent, hardly daring to breathe. The knock came again. Harder. We know someone's in there. Saw your smoke. No harm in helping fellow Christians in need. Still she said nothing through the crack. She watched McKenna nod to his men. They began to circle the cabin, looking for other ways in. Check the windows, Josiah ordered. And that lean-to out back. One man approached her window. Eliza shrank back, but not before catching a glimpse of his scarred face peering through the gap in the shutters. Their eyes met for just an instant. Boss, he called. There's someone in there. All right, a woman. McKenna was at the door in seconds. Eliza Hawthorne, we know you're in there. Come out peaceable-like. And this goes easy. Make us break down this door and things get unpleasant for everyone. Go away, Eliza called, trying to keep her voice steady. You're not welcome here. Now. McKenna's oily voice oozed through the thick wood. Your papa's real worried about you. Wants you home safe. That's all we want to take you home. Liar. The word burst out before she could stop it. You were taking me to Denver, to that house. I heard you talking. Pause. Then McKenna's voice hardened. Plans change, girl. Your father wants you back. Reconsidered his hasty decision. Family should stick together, especially with a baby coming. Eliza almost laughed at the absurdity. Her father reconsidering the man who'd sold her for $15. Having a change of heart, but she held her tongue, knowing anything she said would only confirm her presence. Where's the man who lives here? Josiah called out. Big fellow according to town gossip. He around when she didn't answer. McKenna chuckled. At work. See? Left you all alone? That's mighty careless of him. Dangerous even. These mountains are full of threats. One of the windows shuddered as someone tested it. Then another. They were looking for weaknesses. And the cabin, sturdy as it was, wasn't built to withstand a siege. Last chance, girl. McKenna called. Open this door or we'll. The crack of a rifle shot echoed across the clearing. One of the horses screamed and bolted. The men dove for cover, cursing and drawing their own weapons. The next one won't be a warning shot. Jonah's voice rang out from somewhere among the trees. You men are trespassing on private property. I'll give you one chance to mount up and ride out. This ain't your business, Lumberjack. McKenna shouted back. We're here legal-like, collecting stolen property. Only property I see is a cabin and land that belongs to me and 4 men who weren't invited. That's called trespassing where I come from. Eliza peered through the window, trying to spot Jonah. But he'd concealed himself well. The men were scanning the tree in nervously, unable to pinpoint his location. She's a runaway, Josiah tried. Bound by legal contract. Her father. Another shot. This time splintering wood inches from Josiah's head. I don't recall asking for explanations. I said, get off my land. McKenna, bolder or perhaps more desperate than his companions, stood partially. There's 4 of us and 1 of you, mountain man? You really want to die for some used goods carrying another man's bastard? The silence that followed was deafening. Then Jonah spoke again, his voice carrying a deadly calm that made Eliza shiver. I've got a Winchester rifle with 15 rounds, a clear line of sight, and knowledge of every rock and tree in these parts. I've also got nothing left to lose and a powerful dislike of men who traffic in human misery. So, I'll ask you, do you want to die for $30 profit? 15? One of the hired guns muttered. Split 4 ways. That's less than $4 a man. Shut up, McKenna snarled. But Eliza could see the doubt creeping into their faces. $4 wasn't worth dying for in anyone's book. Tell you what, Jonah continued, I'm feeling generous. Leave now and you ride away whole. Stay and I start evening the odds. Your choice. The 2 hired guns exchanged glances. One of them holstered his weapon. This ain't worth it, McKenna. Girls probably have frozen and near birthing anyway. Damaged goods won't fetch enough to cover a doctor if we get shot up. Coward. Josiah spat. Living coward. The man corrected, moving toward his horse. His partner followed suit. McKenna's face contorted with rage. You can't just. A third shot kicked up snow at his feet. I'm done talking. Jonah announced. Next one. Center mass. What's it going to be? For a long moment, the tableau held. McKenna and Josiah crouched behind minimal cover. The hired guns mounted and ready to flee. Jonah, invisible among the trees with his rifle trained on them. Then McKenna's shoulders sagged. This ain't over, he warned, backing toward his horse. That girl's legal bound. I'll be back with the law. You do that. Jonah replied, Sheriff Watson would be real interested in your business dealings. Might even have questions about those other girls you mentioned losing. Funny how girls in your care seem to disappear. McKenna's face went pale at that. Without another word he mounted up. Josiah followed, though not without casting one last venomous look at the cabin. The 4 men rode out, their horses' hoofbeats gradually fading into the distance. Eliza waited, rifle still clutched in trembling hands, until she heard Jonah's familiar knock. It's me. They're gone. She flew to the door, fumbling with the bar in her haste. Jonah stood there, rifle in hand, snow dusting his dark coat. Without thinking, she threw herself into his arms, the rifle clattering forgotten to the floor. Thank God, she gasped against his chest. I thought when they came. Shoo, he soothed, his arms coming around her carefully. You're safe. They won't be back. How did you know to come back? Saw their tracks crossing mine about a mile out. Fresh horses moving fast toward the cabin. Doubled back quick as I could. He pulled back to look at her. Checking for injury. Did they hurt you? No, they never got inside. But Jonah, they'll come back with more men or the law like they said. No, they won't. His voice held quiet certainty. Men like that operate in shadows. They won't risk real scrutiny from legitimate law. And I wasn't bluffing about Sheriff Watson. He's got no love for their kind. The adrenaline was fading, leaving Eliza shaky and exhausted. Jonah guided her to a chair, then went about securing the cabin, checking windows, reinforcing the door. His movements were calm, methodical, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I've brought nothing but trouble to your door. He paused in his work, turning to face her. You've brought a lot more than trouble. Eliza Hawthorne. What do you mean? He seemed to struggle for words. This man more comfortable with actions than declarations. This cabin's been a tomb for 4 years. Just me and my ghosts, going through the motions of living without really being alive. Then you showed up and suddenly he gestured helplessly. Suddenly there's bread rising on the table and mended clothes and someone to come home to. There's laughter sometimes and conversation that isn't just me talking to myself. There's life again. Tears pricked her eyes. Jonah, I'm not saying I don't expect. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. I just mean you don't need to apologize. Not for needing help. Not for bringing complications. Life's supposed to be complicated. It's the living who have problems. The dead. They don't have troubles anymore. She rose, crossed to where he stood. You're not dead, Jonah Blackwood. You're the most alive person I know. The way you stood up to those men, protecting someone who's nothing to you. You're not nothing, he interrupted fiercely. Don't ever say that. They stood there inches apart, the air between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Then the baby kicked hard, making Eliza gasp and press a hand to her belly. Little one's got opinions, she managed with a shaky laugh. Jonah's expression softened, probably telling us to stop being dramatic and eat something. When's the last time you had a meal? She couldn't remember. The morning's bread making felt like days ago. While Jonah prepared food, Eliza found herself studying him with new eyes. This man who'd saved her not once but twice now. Who spoke of her with respect despite her condition. Who'd faced down 4 armed men without hesitation. Tell me about her, she said suddenly. Margaret, what was she like? Jonah's hands stilled for a moment, then resumed their work. Kind, gentle, saw the good in everyone even when there wasn't much good to see. She'd have liked you, your strength, your spirit. She always said the world needed more women who wouldn't be broken by it. She sounds wonderful. She was. He brought over 2 plates of beans and cornbread. But she's gone and I've mourned her long enough. She wouldn't want me living like a ghost in these woods forever. She'd probably box my ears for wallowing this long. They ate in companionable silence. The danger of the morning settling into memory. Outside, snow began to fall again. But inside, the cabin was warm and safe. When they finished, Eliza began gathering the dishes. But Jonah stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. I need to say something, he began. After today things might get harder. McKenna might not come back himself, but he might send others or spread word in the less savory towns about a pregnant girl hiding in the mountains. I can protect you here, but I can't hide forever. Eliza finished. The baby's coming in a few months. I'll need a midwife, supplies, a future beyond these walls. Much as I've come to love them. Yes. He seemed relieved. She understood. So, we need to think ahead, make plans. The word hung between them, weighted with significance. Jonah met her eyes steadily. If you'll have me, I can't offer much. Just a strong back, a rifle, and a promise to stand between you and anyone who means you harm. But if you want it, you don't have to face what's coming alone. Eliza's throat tightened with emotion. This good man offering partnership without conditions or expectations. No mention of what she might owe him. No suggestion of impropriety, just solidarity in the face of an uncertain world. I'd be honored to have you beside me, Jonah Blackwood, she said softly. He nodded once, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Then we'd best start planning. Winter won't last forever, and when spring comes, we need to be ready for whatever follows. As they began to discuss practicalities, supplies needed, potential allies in town, backup shelters if the cabin was compromised, Eliza felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not just for survival but for a life worth living. The baby moved within her, and she imagined a future where this child would know safety and love. Where the sins of its origins wouldn't define its worth. Outside, the storm gathered strength. A partnership forged in adversity, strengthened by mutual respect, and warmed by the first stirrings of a love neither had expected to find again. Winter deepened its hold on the mountains, bringing storms that lasted days and snow that piled higher than the windows. But inside the small cabin, a different kind of warmth grew. The forced proximity and shared labor of survival drew Eliza and Jonah closer in ways neither had anticipated. Their days fell into a comfortable pattern. Mornings began with Jonah stoking the fire and preparing coffee while Eliza made breakfast. They worked together through the daylight hours. He teaching her to set snares and identify animal tracks. She showing him how to properly darn socks and season the wild game he brought home. Evenings were spent by the fire. Eliza sewing tiny garments from the fabric he'd bought while Jonah carved a cradle from pine wood. His large hands surprisingly gentle with the delicate work. Tell me about your grandmother, Jonah said one evening as his knife shaped smooth curves in the wood. The one who taught you to shoot, Eliza smiled, her needle pausing. Grandma Rose. She was a force of nature. Came west in '49 with Grandpa during the gold rush. He died of fever their first winter. Left her alone with my mother, just a baby. Everyone expected her to go back east, but she stayed. Opened a boarding house, made her own way. Sounds like strength runs in the family. She used to say women had to be twice as tough as men because the world was half as kind to them. Eliza resumed her stitching. I wish he was still alive. She'd have stood up to Papa. Never would have let him. Her voice trailed off. She'd be proud of you, Jonah said quietly. Making your own way. Protecting your child. I'm not making my own way. Eliza protested. I'm depending on your charity. Jonah set down his knife, fixing her with those intense dark eyes. You're earning your keep 10 times over. This place hasn't been this clean, organized, or comfortable in years. I'm eating better, sleeping better. That's not charity. Eliza, that's partnership. The word hung between them, laden with possibility. Partnership. Not patron-independent, but equal sharing the load. The baby kicked and Eliza gasped softly, hand going to her belly. Active tonight? Jonah asked. Always in the evenings. I think it likes the sound of your voice. Something soft crossed his features. May I? He gestured toward her. She nodded and he knelt beside her chair, placing one calloused hand carefully on the swell of her stomach. They waited and then a firm kick right against his palm. His eyes widened with wonder. Strong little one, he murmured. Like its mother you keep saying, Eliza teased gently. True enough. But his hand remained, and she covered it with her own without thinking. They stayed like that for a long moment, connected through the tiny life between them, until the intimacy became too much and they pulled apart. The storm that had been building for days struck that night with unprecedented fury. Wind howled like a living thing, battering the cabin walls. Snow fell so thick and fast, it was impossible to see even a foot beyond the windows. The temperature plummeted until even the roaring fire couldn't keep the cold entirely at bay. Eliza woke shivering in the deep of night, her blankets insufficient against the bitter chill. She could hear Jonah moving about, adding wood to the fire, but the heat seemed to vanish into the Arctic air. This is bad, she heard him mutter. Worse than the storm of 76. She sat up, pulling the blankets around her. How long will it last? No telling. Could be days. He turned from the fire, saw her shivering. You're freezing. I'm fine. No, you're not. And that baby needs you warm. He grabbed his own blankets from beside the fire. This is foolishness. We need to share heat. Conserve the firewood. Eliza's cheeks burned despite the cold. Jonah, that wouldn't be proper. Propriety won't keep you and that child alive if we freeze. His voice was matter-of-fact, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. I'll stay above the blankets, you underneath. Nothing improper, just survival. She knew he was right. Already she could barely feel her toes, and the baby had gone ominously still. Pride and propriety meant nothing against the killing cold. All right, she whispered. He arranged their bedding carefully, her blankets beneath, his on top, with himself fully clothed above the layers. When he lay down beside her, careful to maintain distance despite the narrow bed, his body heat was like a furnace. Eliza couldn't help but sigh in relief as warmth began seeping into her frozen limbs. Better? He asked, voice rumbling in the darkness. Yes, thank you. They lay in silence, acutely aware of each other. Outside, the storm raged as if trying to tear the cabin apart. Inside, two lonely people shared warmth and found comfort in simple proximity. Jonah, Eliza whispered. Mitchell, what you said about Margaret, about mourning her long enough. Did you mean it? A long pause. Yes. She's been gone 4 years. I'll always love her. Always carry the guilt of failing her. But she wouldn't want me to die inside just because she's no longer living. And do you think could you ever? She couldn't finish the thought, but he understood. I already care about you, Eliza, more than I expected. More than I probably should. You and that little one both these weeks. Having you here, it's shown me I'm not as dead inside as I thought. Her heart raced. I care about you too. You're a good man, Jonah Blackwood. The best I've known. His hand found hers in the darkness, fingers intertwining. When spring comes after the baby, would you consider staying? Not as my charity case or my burden, but as more. Are you asking me to marry you? The words came out breathless. I'm asking if you'd consider it a real marriage, not one of convenience or obligation. I know I'm older, set in my ways, marked by loss, and you deserve better than a broken-down lumberjack hiding in the mountains. But I'd be good to you, Eliza. To you and the child. I'd give you both a name, a home, protection, and maybe in time. Love, she finished softly. I think I'm already halfway there, he admitted. But I'd court you proper. I'd give you time to be sure. No rushing, no pressure, just possibility. Tears slipped down her cheeks. This good, honorable man offering not just shelter, but a future. A real future where her child would have a father, where she'd have a partner, where maybe love could bloom from the ashes of their separate griefs. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I had considerate, more than considerate. His fingers tightened on hers. Good, that's good. They fell asleep like that, hands clasped between them, while the storm exhausted itself against the mountain's flanks. When morning came, weak sunlight filtering through the frost-etched windows, they woke to find themselves curled together despite their best intentions, her back against his chest, his arm protective around her middle where the baby stirred. For a moment, neither moved, both aware of the intimacy of their position. Then Jonah carefully extracted himself. I'm sorry. I didn't mean don't apologize, Eliza said softly. We kept each other alive. That's all that matters. But they both knew it was more than that. A line had been crossed in the night, not of impropriety but of emotional honesty. They declared themselves tentatively, but truly the storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed. Drifts reached halfway up the cabin walls, and the pines wore heavy mantles of white. It would take days to dig out, but their wood supply was holding and they had food enough. As they worked together to clear a path to the woodpile and check the animals, Eliza caught Jonah watching her with soft eyes. When he saw her looking, he didn't turn away. No regrets, he asked about what we discussed. No regrets, she confirmed. Just hope. That afternoon, as Eliza sat sewing and Jonah worked on the cradle, she said suddenly, Thomas. Jonah looked up, confused. What? The baby's father. His name was Thomas Brennan. I've never said his name aloud since he left. She took a shaky breath. I need to tell you about him if we're going to, if there's a future for us. You should know. You don't owe me explanations. Yes, I do. I want to tell you. I need to. So she did. Told him about the charming merchant's son who'd courted her with pretty words and promises. About stolen kisses and whispered dreams of marriage. About the night she'd given herself to him, believing they'd be wed within the month. About the look of disgust on his face when she told him about the baby, the cruel words as he'd packed to leave. He said I'd trapped him, that I was just like all the other desperate farm girls trying to catch a husband above their station. Said his father would never accept damaged goods for a daughter-in-law. Her voice was steady but tears tracked down her cheeks. I loved him, thought he loved me, but I was just entertainment while he was stuck in our little town. Jonah sat aside the cradle and crossed to her, kneeling beside her chair as he had that night weeks ago. He's a fool and a coward. Any man who can't see your worth doesn't deserve you. I was so naive. You were trusting. That's not a flaw, Eliza. The world needs more people who can trust and love openly. The flaw was his, not yours. She looked into his weathered face, saw nothing but acceptance and anger on her behalf. How can you not think less of me? I gave myself to a man who wasn't my husband, and now I carry his child. Now you carry your child. Jonah corrected firmly. A child will be lucky to have you for a mother. As for the rest, we've all made choices based on love and trust. Sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. But they don't define our worth. Jonah Blackwood, she said through her tears. You really are the best man I've ever known. Just a man who's learned that judging others is a fool's game. We're all doing our best with the cards we're dealt. He squeezed her hand. Thank you for telling me, for trusting me with it. That evening, as they prepared supper together, there was a new ease between them. The last secrets had been shared, the last barriers lowered. They moved around each other in the small space with the comfortable coordination of a long-married couple. And perhaps that's what they were becoming, not through ceremony but through choice, trust, and the slow building of a life together. When Eliza felt the first sharp pain, she dismissed it as the baby's usual evening acrobatics. But when the second came, harder and lower, she grabbed the edge of the table. Eliza. Jonah was beside her instantly. I don't know. It's too early. I shouldn't. Another pain stealing her breath. Oh God, something's wrong. How early? 2 months, maybe more. Jonah, if the baby comes now, it won't. You're strong. The baby's strong. This is just a warning. Your body's saying, slow down. But his face was pale with concern. Let's get you lying down. He helped her to the bed, hands gentle but trembling slightly as he pulled blankets over her. Eliza caught his hand. If something happens, nothing's going to happen. But if it does, promise me you'll save the baby, even if it means stop. His voice was rough with emotion. Nobody's choosing anybody over anybody. You're both going to be fine. The pains continued for an hour, irregular but frightening, before finally easing. Jonah never left her side, bathing her face with cool water, holding her hand through the worst of it, when at last she relaxed, exhausted but stable. He slumped in the chair beside the bed. Thank God, he breathed. It stopped, she said wonderingly. The baby's still moving. Tough little one like its mother. His attempt at their usual joke fell flat. His fear too evident. Jonah, we need to talk about getting to town when my time comes. I'll need a midwife. I know. I've been thinking on it. There's a woman, Mrs. Sarah Coleman. She's helped birth half the babies in the county. When you're closer, I'll fetch her. Bring her here if needed. And if the snow's too deep, if you can't get through. He met her eyes steadily. Then I'll do what needs doing. I've helped birth calves and foss. Not the same. I know. But the principle. You do that? Help bring another man's child into the world. I'd help bring your child into the world. He corrected. Our child. If you'll let me claim it. Fresh tears came then, but these were tears of gratitude, of love too new to name, but too strong to deny. How did I get so lucky to find you? Luck had nothing to do with it. Jonah said softly. Margaret used to say, God puts people in our path when we need them most. Maybe you needed saving, but I needed you just as much to remind me I'm still alive, still capable of caring for something beyond my own guilt. She tugged his hand until he sat on the edge of the bed, then pulled him down until his forehead rested against hers. We saved each other then. He agreed. And we'll keep on saving each other one day at a time. Outside, snow began falling again, but gently this time inside, two people who'd found each other at their lowest points held on tight, building a future from the ashes of their pasts. The baby moved between them, strong and vital despite the scare, a promise of new life in the depths of winter. And in that moment, in a small cabin hidden in the Colorado mountains, love, tentative but true, took root and began to grow. The rumor started as whispers in the general store, carried on the lips of trappers and traders who'd glimpsed smoke from Jonah's cabin or caught sight of women's clothing on his wash line. By the time the snow began to thin in late February, those whispers had grown into full-throated gossip that reached even the most isolated homesteads. Jonah first heard it when he went to town for supplies. Ben Morrison, the shopkeeper, leaned across the counter with the eager expression of a man with news to share. Heard you got company up at your place. Blackwood, some saying it's a woman. Jonah continued examining a sack of flour. His expression carefully neutral. Man gets lonely. Took in a housekeeper for the winter months. Housekeeper. Ben's tone suggested he wasn't buying it. Young one, from what Carl Hensley says, he spotted her at your window when he was tracking that wounded elk last month. My business is my own. Morrison. Sure. Just saying. Folks talk, especially when there's been men asking around about a runaway girl. Pregnant girl. They said Jonah's hands stilled on the flour sack. What men? Rough sorts came through about a week back. That one called himself McKenna was back. Brought some official-looking papers. Sheriff Watson ran them off again, but they were powerful, insistent about their legal rights. Ben lowered his voice. Between you and me, Jonah. If you're harboring something you shouldn't, I'm harboring nothing but a woman in need of honest work and shelter. Jonah's voice carried a warning that made Ben step back. Anyone has issue with Christian charity can take it up with me directly. He completed his purchases in tense silence and loaded his wagon with supplies. But as he drove out of town, he noticed the looks, some curious, some judgmental, some calculating. The town's fragile tolerance of him, earned through years of keeping to himself and causing no trouble, was cracking. When he reached home, he found Eliza outside despite his warnings to stay hidden. She was hanging wash, humming softly, the late afternoon sun catching the auburn in her hair. Her pregnancy was unmistakable now, the curve of her belly prominent beneath Margaret's old dress. You shouldn't be out here, he said, climbing down from the wagon. She turned, smile fading at his expression. What happened? McKenna's been back. He's stirring up talk in town. Has papers now. Legal documents. The color drained from her face. Legal papers. But how? Your father. Most likely. A bill of sale, contract of indenture, something giving McKenna a claim. He began unloading supplies. Movements sharp with agitation. We need to be more careful. No more outside work during daylight. I can't hide forever. Jonah. She pressed a hand to her back, rubbing the constant ache there. This baby's coming in weeks, not months. What then? He stopped, really looking at her. The sun behind her created a halo effect. And despite the fear in her eyes, she looked beautiful, maternal, strong, his in every way that mattered except legally. Then we make it legal, he said suddenly. We go to town tomorrow, find Judge Harper, get married proper. Give you and the baby the protection of my name. Jonah, we discussed waiting. That was before McKenna came back with papers as my wife. You'd have legal protection. A husband's rights supersede a father's or any contract of indenture. He crossed to her, taking her hands. I know it's sooner than we planned, but yes, he blinked. Yes, I'll marry you tomorrow. Today if we could. Her green eyes were fierce with determination. I won't let them take me. Jonah won't let them take our baby. Our baby? The word settled something in his chest. I like the sound of that. They spent the evening in preparation. Eliza altered one of Margaret's better dresses to fit her changed figure while Jonah cleaned and mended his rarely worn Sunday clothes. There was a nervous energy between them, an awareness that tomorrow would change everything. Are you certain? Eliza asked as they sat by the fire after supper. Marriage is forever. You'd be taking on another man's child, facing down the judgment of the entire town. The town's been judging me for years. Jonah interrupted. As for the child, I've been carving its cradle for months, planning its future, feeling it kick under my hand. Thomas Brennan might have sired it, but I'll be its father if you'll let me. She crossed to where he sat, cooped his weathered face in her hands. How did I find you? How did God see fit to put you in my path when I needed you most? Maybe he was putting you in mine, Jonah said softly. I was the one who was lost. Eliza living but not alive. You brought me back. She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they parted, both were breathless. Tomorrow then, she whispered. Tomorrow. But tomorrow brought complications. They'd barely reached the outskirts of town when riders appeared on the road. McKenna, Josiah, and two others blocking their path. McKenna held a sheath of papers like a weapon. Miss Hawthorne, he called out, touching his hat in mock courtesy. Or should I say property of one Samuel Hawthorne, legally contracted to my custody. Jonah brought the wagon to a halt, his rifle within easy reach. Get out of our way, McKenna. Can't do that. I've got legal papers here. Signed and witnessed. The girl's father sold her fair and square. Debt bondage for a term of 7 years or until such time as she's earned out her purchase price plus interest. He waved the documents. All legal-like. Slavery's been outlawed, Eliza said, her voice steady despite her fear. This ain't slavery, miss. This is a legal contract of indenture. Your father had debts. Sold your labor to pay them. Common as dirt in these parts. McKenna's smile was oily. Of course, with you being in a family way and all, Mrs. Garrison's establishment is the only place likely to take you. But that's between you and her. Jonah stood slowly in the wagon, rifle now in his hands. Last warning. Move aside or what? You'll shoot us down in broad daylight. There's witnesses all around. Blackwood, you fire that rifle, you'll hang for murder. McKenna gestured to the gathering crowd of townspeople drawn by the commotion. Besides, you got no claim on her. She ain't your wife, ain't your kin, just some stray you took in. She's my intended, Jonah stated clearly, his voice carrying to the crowd. We're on our way to Judge Harper now to be married. A murmur ran through the onlookers. McKenna's face darkened. Marriage don't void a legal contract signed prior. Judge will tell you the same. Then we'll let him decide. A new voice interjected. Reverend Michael Pritchard emerged from the crowd, his black coat and collar lending him authority. He was a young minister, new to the town with kind eyes and an unwavering sense of justice that had already ruffled feathers among the establishment. Reverend, McKenna said wearily, this ain't church business. A young woman in distress is always church business, the Reverend replied mildly. He approached the wagon, offering Eliza a reassuring smile. Ma'am, are you being held against your will by Mr. Blackwood here? No. The word burst out of her. He saved me. These men, she pointed at McKenna and Josiah. They mean to take me to A House of Ilrood in Denver. My father sold me to them like livestock. More murmurs from the crowd. Some sympathetic, others skeptical. The Reverend's expression grew stern. Mr. McKenna, surely you're not in the business of trafficking young women. I'm in the business of collecting legal debts. McKenna shot back. Got the papers to prove it. Signed by her father. Witness proper. May I see these papers? McKenna hesitated, then handed them over. The Reverend examined them carefully, his frown deepening. These documents are concerning, he admitted. But there's a higher law than contracts, Mr. McKenna. The law of human decency and Christian charity. Pretty words don't void legal documents. Josiah growled. No. Judge Harper's voice cut through the tension as he pushed through the crowd, clearly drawn by the commotion. But I do have some say in interpreting the law in this county. The judge was an older man, fair-minded but strict about legal precedent. Jonah's heart sank. Harper wouldn't bend the law, not even for moral reasons. Judge, McKenna said quickly, these papers, I'll examine them in my chambers. Harper interrupted. All parties involved will present their case. We'll settle this properly, not in the street like vigilantes. His gaze swept over everyone. Mr. Blackwood, Miss Hawthorne, Mr. McKenna, my office. 1 hour. The crowd began to disperse, though whispers followed them like smoke. Jonah helped Eliza down from the wagon, feeling her trembling. It'll be all right, he murmured. Will it? Her eyes were haunted. Those papers looked real, Jonah. What if the judge? Then we run, he said simply. Head north to Canada or west to California. Whatever it takes to keep you safe. Reverend Pritchard approached them. Mr. Blackwood, Miss Hawthorne, might I suggest something? They looked at him hopefully. Marriage may not void the existing contract, but it does complicate matters. A husband has certain rights, and judges are reluctant to separate married couples. He glanced around, then lowered his voice. I could perform the ceremony now before the hearing. It might help your case. You do that? Eliza asked. But the scandal, I became a minister to serve God and protect the innocent, Pritchard said firmly. Not to worry about scandal. Will you have me perform the service? Jonah and Eliza exchanged glances. A lifetime of communication in a single look. Yes, they said in unison. The ceremony was brief, performed in the small church with Mrs. Coleman, the midwife Jonah had mentioned, and her husband as witnesses. No flowers, no music, no fancy dress, just two people pledging themselves to each other while McKenna and his men waited outside like wolves. Do you, Jonah, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse? Till death do you part? I do. His voice was strong, certain. Do you, Eliza, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part? I do. Her voice was quieter, but no less certain. Then, by the power vested in me by God in the state of Colorado, I pronounce you man and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put us under. Jonah kissed his bride gently, tasting tears on her lips. When they parted, she was smiling through her tears. Mrs. Blackwood, he murmured. How does it feel like coming home? She whispered back. They had 30 minutes before the hearing in the vestry. Eliza tried to compose herself while Mrs. Coleman fussed over her appearance. Don't you worry, dear. The older woman said, Judge Harper's fair and that McKenna's a snake. Everyone knows it. Trading in human misery. She lowered her voice. Lost my own niece to men like him. Told her family she was going to work in a hotel in San Francisco. Never heard from her again. The church door burst open. Josiah stood there, face twisted with anger. Time's up. Judge is waiting. They walked to the courthouse, surrounded by a growing crowd. Word had spread quickly. Jonah Blackwood had married the mysterious pregnant woman, and now there was to be a legal battle over her fate. In a frontier town, starved for entertainment. This was better than a hanging. Judge Harper's chambers were cramped, barely fitting all the parties involved. The judge sat behind his desk, spectacles perched on his nose as he examined the documents. These papers appear to be in order, he said finally. A contract of indenture signed by Samuel Hawthorne selling his daughter's labor for a term of 7 years in exchange for $15. Your Honor, Reverend Pritchard interjected. Surely you cannot uphold what amounts to slavery. It's not slavery, Harper said wearily. Indentured servitude is legal in this state, particularly for debt resolution. He looked at Eliza. Did your father have debts, Mrs. Blackwood? Yes, she admitted quietly. But he sold me because I was with child, because I brought shame. The reason doesn't void the contract, McKenna interrupted smugly. However, Harper continued, shooting McKenna a stern look. The situation is complicated by the subsequent marriage. Mr. Blackwood, as the woman's husband, you now have certain rights and responsibilities regarding her person in labor. I'll buy out her contract, Jonah said immediately. Whatever the terms, I'll pay. McKenna smiled unpleasantly. $15 principal plus interest compounded daily plus collection fees comes to about $300. Gasps echoed through the room. It was an astronomical sum, more than most men saw in a year. That's usury, the Reverend protested. That's business, McKenna countered. Judge Harper removed his spectacles, rubbing his eyes. The amount does seem excessive. The door opened again. And Sheriff Watson entered, his expression grim. Judge, sorry to interrupt, but thought you should know. Just got a wire from Denver. There's warrants out for a McKenna and Josiah Briggs. Seems some girls in their custody went missing, and families are asking questions. The room went silent. McKenna's face palled. That's got nothing to do with Josiah started. Shut up. McKenna hissed. Judge Harper leaned forward. Mr. McKenna, Are you wanted for questioning in Denver? It's a misunderstanding. Yes or no? McKenna's jaw worked. There might be some questions about inventory loss. Inventory? Eliza said, her voice cutting. Is that what you call the girls who disappear? The ones who try to run or fight back. Inventory loss? You can't prove. I can testify. Eliza continued, standing despite Jonah's attempt to keep her seated. I heard you and Josiah talking about the girls you lost, about how Mrs. Garrison doesn't ask questions as long as you deliver fresh ones. She faced the judge squarely. Your Honor, these men are traitors in human misery. My father may have signed those papers, but he signed them with devils. The judge was quiet for a long moment. Then, Sheriff Watson, I think you should detain Mr. McKenna and Mr. Briggs pending investigation of these Denver warrants. You can't do this, McKenna shouted as Watson moved toward him. I got legal papers, rights. You have the right to remain silent, Watson said grimly, producing shackles. I suggest you use it. As the sheriff led the cursing men away. Judge Harper turned to Jonah and Eliza. The contract, while distasteful, does appear legal. However, with the contracting party now under criminal investigation, and given the marriage complicating matters, he sighed. I'm placing a stay on the contract enforcement pending outcome of the Denver investigation. If McKenna is convicted of trafficking, all his contracts will be void. And if he's not, Jonah asked, then we'll revisit the matter. But something tells me Mr. McKenna won't be in a position to collect debts for quite some time. The judge's expression softened slightly. Go home, Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood. Live your lives and congratulations on your marriage. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had grown. Some faces showed disapproval. A pregnant bride and a social pariah made for scandal. But others, particularly the women who knew what men like McKenna represented, offered nods of support. You did it, Eliza breathed, sagging against Jonah. We did it. Not done yet, he cautioned. This is just a reprieve, but it's a start. Reverend Pritchard caught up with them. That was brave. What you did in there, Mrs. Blackwood, speaking truth to power. It was necessary, she said simply. Indeed. And Mr. Blackwood, if I may say, your wife is fortunate to have found such a protector. I'm the fortunate one, Jonah corrected, his arm tightening around Eliza as they climbed back into the wagon to head home. Mrs. Coleman called out. You send word when your time comes. Dear, day or night, I'll be there. The ride home was quiet, both processing the events of the day. They were married now, truly legally bound. The danger wasn't past, but they'd won this battle. As the cabin came into view, Eliza suddenly gasped. Hand flying to her belly. What is it? Jonah asked, alarmed. Nothing bad, she assured him, grabbing his hand and placing it on her stomach. Just our little one celebrating, I think. Sure enough, he felt the strong movements beneath his palm. Their child safe for now, protected by law and love and the fierce determination of its parents. Let's go home, Mrs. Blackwood, he said softly. Yes, she agreed, leaning into him. Let's go home. The sun was setting as they reached the cabin, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold. Whatever tomorrow brought, tonight they were together, married and free. It was enough. It was everything. The storm arrived without warning on a moonless night in early March. Eliza woke to the sound of wind shrieking through the pines and Jonah adding wood to the fire. His movements urgent. Bad one coming, he said when he saw her watching. Temperatures dropping fast. She struggled to sit up, her swollen belly making every movement difficult. The baby had dropped low in recent days and she felt the constant pressure. How bad? Bad enough. He secured the shutters, checked their supplies, could be snowed in for days. Neither voiced what they both feared, that the baby might come during the storm with no way to fetch Mrs. Coleman. They'd been counting on another 2 weeks at least, time enough for the weather to break and roads to clear. By morning, the world outside had vanished behind a wall of white snow fell so thick and fast that even opening the door became a struggle. The temperature plummeted until ice formed on the inside of the windows despite the roaring fire. We have enough wood, Eliza asked, trying to keep the worry from her voice. Plenty. Laid in extra after the last storm. Jonah squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. We'll be fine. But as the day wore on, Eliza felt the first telltale tightening across her belly. She said nothing, hoping it was false labor. The practice pains Mrs. Coleman had warned her about, but they continued, growing slowly stronger and more regular. By evening she couldn't hide it anymore. In the middle of dinner, she gasped, gripping the table edge as a stronger contraction rolled through her. Jonah was beside her instantly. Is it time? I don't know. Maybe it's too early. Only by a week or two. Babies come when they're ready. But his face was pale. They both knew the danger of birth, even with experienced help without it. I'm scared, she admitted. I know. I'm too. He helped her to bed, hands gentle but trembling slightly. But we're going to get through this. Together. The hours that followed blurred into a haze of increasing pain and desperate preparation. Jonah boiled water, tore clean sheets into strips, tried to remember everything he'd ever heard about birthing. Between contractions, Eliza gave him instructions from what she remembered of her mother's lying in. When the baby comes, you have to clear its mouth and nose first, she panted. Make sure it can breathe. And the cord, I know he delivered calves and Foss understood the basics, but this was different. This was Eliza, was their child. The weight of responsibility threatened to crush him. Midnight came and went. The storm raged unabated, sealing them in their private world of struggle and pain. Eliza's cries mingled with the wind's howl as the contractions grew stronger, closer together. I can't, she gasped at one point, exhausted and terrified. Jonah, I can't. Yes, you can. He bathed her face with cool water. Let her crush his hand through the worst of it. You're the strongest person I know. You escaped those men. Survived the mountains. Made it through everything to get here. You can do this. Stay with me. Always. I'm not going anywhere. Dawn brought no relief from the storm, but marked a change in Eliza's labor. The urge to push became overwhelming, primal. Jonah positioned himself as best he could, drawing on every memory of animal births, every fragment of overheard wisdom. I can see the head, he said, voice rough with emotion. Dark hair like yours. You're doing so well. Love just a little more. Love, he'd never used the word before, but it felt right. Necessary. Eliza bore down with a cry that seemed to come from her very soul. And suddenly the baby was sliding into Jonah's waiting hands. Tiny, perfect, covered in blood and vernix, but the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. For a moment that lasted eternity. Silence. Then the baby's first cry split the air, strong and indignant at being thrust into the cold world. It's a girl, Jonah said, tears streaming down his face. A perfect little girl. He cleaned the baby's face as Eliza had instructed, cut and tied the cord with shaking hands, then placed the squalling infant on her mother's chest. Eliza sobbed as she held her daughter for the first time, counting fingers and toes, marveling at the rosebud mouth and furious little fists. She's beautiful, Eliza whispered. Our daughter. Our daughter. Jonah agreed, the words settling into his heart with permanent weight. The afterbirth came without complication, and Jonah handled it as matter-of-factly as he could, though inside he was trembling with relief. Both mother and child had survived. They were whole, healthy, miraculous. As he cleaned up and stoked the fire higher, Eliza nursed the baby for the first time. Wincing at the unfamiliar sensation but determined, the little girl latched on with enthusiasm that made both parents laugh weakly. She's got your stubbornness already, Jonah observed, settling carefully beside them on the bed. And your determination, Eliza countered. She looked up at him with eyes full of love and gratitude. You saved us both. You saved yourself. I just caught her. He stroked the baby's downy head with one finger, marveling at the softness. What shall we call her? Eliza was quiet for a moment. Rose, she said finally. After my grandmother, Rose Margaret Blackwood. After both our strong women. Jonah's voice was thick. Margaret would have loved her immediately. She would have loved you being happy. Eliza corrected gently. And you are, aren't you? Happy? He looked at his wife, beautiful despite exhaustion, fierce as a mountain cat protecting her cub, and the baby who'd already claimed his heart completely, though she bore no blood of his. Happier than I ever thought I'd be again, he admitted. I love you, Eliza. Both of you, my girls, your girls, she agreed, leaning into him. Always. The storm continued for 2 more days, but inside the cabin, a different kind of weather prevailed. They existed in a bubble of new parenthood. Jonah hovering anxiously, bringing Eliza food and water, changing soiled cloths. Eliza learning the rhythms of nursing and sleeping when the baby slept. Both of them marveling at each tiny sound and expression from Rose. She has your nose, Jonah declared during one of the baby's alert periods. And your scowl, Eliza teased. Look how she furrows her brow. Probably wondering how she ended up with such peculiar parents. Lucky that's how she ended up. Eliza's expression grew serious. Jonah, I need to say something. He waited, sensing the weight of what was coming. When I was carrying her, when I was alone and frightened, I used to pray she'd look like me. No trace of Thomas. Nothing to remind the world of how she came to be. She stroked Rose's cheek. But now I'm glad she's exactly who she is. Every part of her story, even the painful parts, led her here, to us, to you. She'll never doubt she's wanted, Jonah said fiercely. Never wonder if she belongs. She's our daughter in every way that matters. I know, Eliza smiled through tears. Just like I'm your wife in every way that matters. Not because of papers or ceremonies, but because you chose us. Choose us every day. When the storm finally broke on the third day, Jonah ventured out to find a world transformed. Drifts reached the roof in places, and several trees had fallen under the weight of snow. It took him hours to clear a path to the woodshed and check on the animals. By afternoon he'd managed to reach the main road. To his surprise, he found Reverend Pritchard and several men from town already working to clear the way. Blackwood, the Reverend called out. Thank God. We were worried when the storm hit so hard. Is Eliza? She's well. The baby came during the storm. The men gathered around, expressions ranging from concern to curiosity. The baby came during that blizzard? Old Sam Henderson asked. Is it? She a healthy girl. Both mother and child are doing fine without Mrs. Coleman. Reverend Pritchard's face showed genuine worry. My word, you must have been terrified, Jonah admitted. But Eliza was brave as a soldier. And the little one seems determined to thrive. What's her name? This from young Tom Morrison. Ben's son Rose. Rose Margaret Blackwood. Something shifted in the men's faces by naming the child, by claiming her so publicly. Jonah had made a declaration. This wasn't just charity or Christian duty. This was family. Well then, Reverend Pritchard said warmly, congratulations are in order. A new life is always cause for celebration. He glanced at the others meaningfully. Wouldn't you all agree? A murmur of assent, some more enthusiastic than others, but it was a start. I'll send Mrs. Coleman up as soon as the road's clear. Sam offered. She'll want to check on them both and I'll bring up some supplies. Tom added. Ma's always saying babies need more things than you'd expect. As Jonah headed home, his heart felt lighter despite the exhaustion. The town might never fully accept him, might always whisper about the scandal of Eliza's pregnancy and their hasty marriage. But Rose would have a chance at belonging in a way her parents couldn't. He found Eliza sleeping when he returned. Rose cradled against her chest. Both looked peaceful. Safe, perfect. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, memorizing the sight. His family, complete and whole, despite everything that had tried to tear them apart. That evening Mrs. Coleman arrived as promised, red-faced from the climb, but determined to check on her charges. Should have sent for me, she scolded Jonah while examining Eliza and the baby with practiced hands. Storm or no storm wasn't possible, Eliza defended. And Jonah did wonderfully. Couldn't have asked for a better midwife. Mrs. Coleman snorted but looked impressed despite herself. Well, you both came through it healthy. That's what matters. Baby's a good size despite being early. Strong lungs too from what I'm hearing. As if to prove the point, Rose began to fuss, quickly escalating to full-throated wails, definitely strong lungs. Jonah agreed, moving to pick her up. The baby settled immediately in his arms, nuzzling against his chest. Already got you wrapped around her tiny finger. Mrs. Coleman observed with a knowing smile. Good thing too. Every little girl needs a papa who thinks she hung the moon. She did, Jonah said simply. Both my girls did later after Mrs. Coleman had gone and night had fallen. The little family gathered in the big bed, a necessity for nighttime feedings and the simple need to be close. Rose slept between them, making soft snuffling sounds that both parents found endlessly fascinating. I've been thinking, Eliza said softly, about what you said to those men in town, about the baby being a Blackwood. She is a Blackwood, I know, but legally. Should we do something to make it official in case McKenna somehow escapes justice or if Thomas ever? She couldn't finish the thought. I'll talk to Judge Harper. Jonah promised. See about formal adoption papers. Make sure there's never any question about who her father is. Her father is the man who delivered her in a blizzard. Eliza said firmly. Who carved her cradle and built her future with his own hands. Who loves her mother and chose them both when the world would have turned away. Rose stirred, opening dark eyes to gaze unfocused at the world. Jonah offered her his finger and she gripped it with surprising strength. See, Eliza murmured. She knows who her papa is. And in that moment, in a cabin still surrounded by snow, but filled with warmth and love and new life, Jonah understood that sometimes the families we choose are stronger than those we're born to. McKenna was gone. The threat lifted and spring would come soon with its promise of renewal. But for now this was enough. His wife drowsing beside him, his daughter holding tight to his finger, and the knowledge that against all odds they'd built something beautiful from the ashes of their separate griefs. I love you, he whispered to both his girls. Forever and always. Outside the wind had gentled to a whisper, and stars emerged from behind the clouds. The world was vast and often cruel. But in this small space love had won. A baby born of sorrow had become a child of joy, and 3 broken people had become a family. It was, Jonah thought, as sleep finally claimed him. Nothing short of a miracle. Spring arrived like a gentle benediction, melting the snow and awakening the mountain meadows with wild flowers. Rose was 2 months old, round-shaked and bright-eyed. When Jonah carried out the rocking chair he'd been crafting in secret, he placed it on the cabin's porch where Eliza could sit with the baby and watch the world come alive. "It's beautiful," Eliza said, running her hand over the smooth wood. "When did you mornings while you both slept?" He helped her settle into it. Rose cradled in her arms. "Thought you might like to rock her outside when the weather turned." She looked up at him with such love it took his breath away. "Have I told you today that you're wonderful?" Once or twice he kissed her forehead, then Rose's. "But I never tire of hearing it." The news from town carried by Reverend Pritchard on his monthly visits was encouraging. McKenna and Josiah had been convicted in Denver, not just for trafficking, but for the suspected murder of at least 3 girls who'd tried to escape their custody. They would never threaten anyone again. "Judge Harper says the adoption papers are ready whenever you can come to town." The Reverend informed them over coffee. "Make Rose legally yours, Jonah, with all the rights of a natural-born child." "She's already mine," Jonah said, watching the baby sleep in her cradle. "But it'll be good to have it official." "The town's warming to the idea of you 3, Pritchard added. "Mrs. Coleman speaks highly of you both, and that carries weight. Several of the church women want to organize a proper welcome for Rose, a baptism, perhaps." Eliza and Jonah exchanged glances. Returning to town society, even for their daughter's sake, felt daunting after their winter isolation. "We'll think on it," Jonah said diplomatically. But as April bloomed into May, they found themselves drawn back into the community by small degrees. First, it was Mrs. Coleman's regular visits to check on Rose, always bringing some small gift or practical advice. Then Tom Morrison started delivering supplies, saving Jonah the trip to town and always staying for coffee and admiration of the baby. "She's got your smile, Mrs. Blackwood," Tom said one afternoon, making faces at Rose, who gurgled happily in response. "And her father's stubborn streak." Eliza laughed. "Fight sleep like it's her mortal enemy." "All the best people do," Tom agreed. He hesitated, then added, "My mother wanted me to ask. There's a church picnic next Sunday, first of the season. She thought maybe you'd like to come introduce Rose properly to everyone." Eliza looked at Jonah, reading the uncertainty in his eyes. They'd been pars for so long. The invitation felt both welcome and worrying. "Tell your mother we're grateful," she said carefully. "We'll consider it." After Tom left, they sat together on the porch, Rose drowsing in Eliza's arms while Jonah whittled at a toy for her. "Do you want to go?" he asked. "I want Rose to have what we couldn't," Eliza said softly. "A place in the community, friends, acceptance. If bearing some whispers and stares makes that possible, then we go." Jonah finished. Face them together. The morning of the picnic dawned bright and clear. Eliza dressed Rose in the tiny gown she'd sewn from the finest fabric Jonah had bought. Embroidered with delicate flowers, she wore her best dress, altered from one of Margaret's, but made her own with careful needlework. Jonah put on his Sunday clothes, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Ready?" he asked at the door. "No," Eliza admitted. "But let's go anyway." The church grounds were already crowded when they arrived. Conversation stuttered to a halt as they approached, all eyes turning to the small family. Eliza felt Jonah tense beside her, his protective instincts flaring. Then Mrs. Coleman bustled forward, arms outstretched. "There's my little angel. Oh, hasn't she grown? Come, come. You must let the other mothers see her." Before Eliza quite knew what was happening, she was swept into a circle of women, all cooing over Rose and sharing their own baby stories. The initial awkwardness gave way to the universal language of motherhood, sleepless nights, first smiles, worries, and joys. Jonah found himself similarly absorbed by the men, who seemed determined to include him in discussions of planting seasons and timber prices. Sheriff Watson clapped him on the shoulder. "Glad you came. Blackwood takes courage to face down gossip. Respect that in a man. My wife's the courageous one," Jonah said, watching Eliza laugh at something. Mrs. Morrison said, "I'm just following her lead." "Smart man," Watson agreed. "Happy wife, happy life, as they say." The afternoon passed more pleasantly than either had dared hope. There were still those who whispered behind their hands, who made pointed comments about hasty marriages and early babies, but there were more who seemed willing to let the past lie, to judge the Blackwoods by their present rather than their history. It was near sunset when the real test came. Thomas Brennan returned from his eastern exile, appeared at the edge of the gathering, older, harder-looking, but unmistakably the man who fathered Rose. Eliza saw him first, her body going rigid with shock. Jonah followed her gaze, his hand moving instinctively to where his rifle would have been. Thomas approached slowly, his eyes fixed on the baby in Eliza's arms. The crowd seemed to sense the tension, conversations dying as people noticed the Strayers' focused attention on the Blackwoods. "Eliza," Thomas said when he was close enough. His voice was different, rougher, uncertain. I came back and heard what happened about your father. Those men, Mr. Brennan." Jonah's voice was level but carried clear warning. "State your business." Thomas's gaze flicked to Jonah, taking in the protective stance, the wedding ring. The way Eliza leaned into her husband's strength. Needed to see. His eyes returned to Rose. "Is she?" "She's my daughter," Jonah said firmly. "Mine and my wife's if you've come to cause trouble." "No," Thomas raised his hands. "No trouble. He seemed to struggle for words. "I heard what my leaving caused. What your father did. I never meant for any of that to happen. Your intentions matter less than your actions." Eliza said quietly. "You left. You called me desperate, grasping, ruined. You washed your hands of responsibility." Thomas flinched. "I was wrong, cowardly. My father threatened to disinherit me if I married beneath our station. And he shook his head. "I chose money over honor. I've regretted it every day since." "Your regrets are your own burden to bear." Jonah said, "They've got nothing to do with us." Thomas nodded slowly. "I know. I'm not here to make any claims or cause problems. I just needed to see for myself that you both were all right, that the child was well." Rose chose that moment to wake, making soft cooing sounds. Thomas's face crumpled at the sight of her. Perfect, innocent, another man's daughter in all the ways that mattered. "She's beautiful," he said roughly. "Looks like her mother." "She looks like herself," Eliza corrected. "Rose Margaret Blackwood, strong and perfect and loved." "Loved," Thomas repeated. "Good. That's good." He looked at Jonah. "You'll take care of them." "With my life," Jonah said simply. Thomas nodded once more, then turned to go. He paused, looking back. "For what it's worth, Eliza, I'm sorry. For everything, you deserve better." "I found better," Eliza said, her hand finding Jonah's. "I found everything." Thomas walked away then, shoulders bowed with the weight of choices that couldn't be undone. The crowd watched him go, then slowly returned to their conversations, processing this unexpected drama. "You all right?" Jonah asked softly. "Yes," Eliza said, and meant it. "Seeing him again, I thought it would hurt more. But all I felt was pity. He threw away so much for so little." "His loss," Jonah said. "My gain." Reverend Pritchard approached them as the gathering began to break up. "That was handled with grace," he said. "Both of you showed remarkable restraint. No point in anger." Eliza said, "Rose has a father, a real father who chose her, who'll never abandon her for convenience or cowardice." "Indeed." The Reverend smiled. "Speaking of which, have you given more thought to the baptism? I think today proved the community is ready to embrace your family." Jonah and Eliza looked at each other, communicating silently. Then Eliza smiled. "Yes, we'd be honored to have Rose baptized." The ceremony took place 2 weeks later on a glorious spring morning. The church was full, not just out of curiosity but genuine celebration. Rose wore the christening gown Eliza had spent countless hours creating. All delicate lace and tiny pearl buttons. "Do you, Jonah and Eliza Blackwood, present this child for baptism?" Reverend Pritchard asked. "We do," they answered together. "What name do you give this child?" "Rose Margaret Blackwood," Jonah said clearly, proudly. As the holy water touched Rose's forehead, she blinked in surprise but didn't cry, seeming to understand the solemnity of the moment. The congregation murmured appreciation at her composure. "Rose Margaret," the Reverend ended, "I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. May you grow in grace and wisdom, surrounded by love and community." After the service, the Blackwoods found themselves at the center of well-wishers. Women who had once whispered about Eliza now offered advice on teething and colic. Men who had shunned Jonah now spoke of business opportunities, including him in plans for a new sawmill operation. "Feels like the tides turned," Sheriff Watson observed, joining them on the church steps. "Town's got a short memory when folks prove themselves worthy." "We're just living our lives," Jonah said. "Raising our daughter. Sometimes that's the biggest rebellion of all," Watson said with a knowing smile. "Living well despite what the world throws at you." As they prepared to leave, Old Sam Henderson approached with a parcel. "For the little one," he said gruffly. "My late wife made it for our granddaughter, but she's outgrown it now." Inside was a beautiful knitted blanket, soft as cloud. Eliza's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Henderson, this is too kind." "Nonsense. Babies need warm things. Mountain nights are cold even in summer." He cleared his throat. "You folks are good people. What's past is past. Time to look forward." The ride home was quiet. All three Blackwoods drowsy from the day's emotions. As they crested the final hill and their cabin came into view, Jonah felt the familiar sense of homecoming, but stronger now. This wasn't just a refuge anymore. It was a home connected to a community, a place where their daughter would grow up belonging. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun paint the mountains gold and crimson, Eliza said, "We did it." "Did what?" "Found our place. Made a family. Built a life from ashes." She shifted Rose to her other arm, leaning against Jonah's shoulder. "Last winter I thought my life was over. Now look at us. God works in mysterious ways." Jonah agreed. "Brought you to my door in a blizzard. Gave us Rose during another. Maybe storms bring blessings sometimes. Or maybe," Eliza said, "we make our own blessings by choosing love over fear, hope over despair." Rose gurgled agreement, waving her tiny fists at the darkening sky where the first stars were appearing. Her parents laughed, the sound carrying across the meadow and into the trees where it startled a family of deer. "What do you think she'll be?" Eliza amused. "Our Rose, whatever she wants," Jonah said firmly. "Teacher, doctor, explorer. The world's changing. By the time she's grown, maybe doors that were closed to us will be open to her. With you as her father, she'll believe she can move mountains. With you as her mother, she'll have the strength to actually do it." They sat in comfortable silence as night fell properly, the cabin windows glowing warm behind them. Inside waited the life they'd built together, simple but rich with love. The cradle Jonah had carved. The quilts Eliza had sewn. The table where they shared meals and dreams. "I love you," Eliza said suddenly. "I don't say it enough. But I love you, Jonah Blackwood. For saving me, for choosing us, for being the man you are." "You saved me right back," he said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Gave me reason to live again. Not just exist. I love you too, Eliza. You and Rose both more than words can say." A wolf howled somewhere in the distance, but it didn't sound threatening. Just another creature making its way in the wild world. Inside the cabin, Rose would sleep in her cradle while her parents lay nearby, ever watchful, ever grateful. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There would be those who never fully accepted them. Whispers that might follow Rose as she grew. But there would also be friends, community, the gradual building of a life worth living. For tonight, though, this was enough. A family forged in hardship, but tempered by love. Sitting on their porch and watching the stars emerge. Three souls who'd found each other in the wilderness and chosen to build something beautiful from the ruins of their separate pasts. "Ready to go in?" Jonah asked as the mountain grew chill. "In a moment," Eliza said. "I want to remember this. All of it. How far we've come. How lucky we are." "Not luck," Jonah corrected gently. We chose each other. Chose hope. Chose to fight for this. "Then here's to choices," Eliza said, raising an imaginary glass. "And to the storms that bring blessings in disguise." "To storms," Jonah agreed. "And to the peace that follows." They went inside. Then to warmth and light and the quiet breathing of their daughter. Outside the mountains stood eternal guard while the stars wheeled overhead. Witness to the small miracle of a family who'd found their forever in the most unlikely of circumstances. In the morning there would be chores and challenges, the ongoing work of building a life. But for now there was only this love, safety, and the promise of all the tomorrows yet to come. The lumberjack had taken in a desperate girl and found his salvation. The pregnant girl sold by her kin had discovered her worth and claimed her place, and a baby born of sorrow had become the bridge to joy, binding two broken hearts into one whole family. It was, as Reverend Pritchard might say, nothing short of grace. Thank you all for listening to this story of love, redemption, and new beginnings in the Wild West. Where are you listening from today? Please subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Eliza and Jonah's journey. Did their story touch your heart as it touched mine? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from each and every one of you.